Chapter 19. Replacements. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. Abraham Lincoln. One of my favorite television miniseries is Band of Brothers. From the show, viewers obtain a sobering glimpse of what it was like to fight in the Second World War, and just how much more dangerous this European battlefield was compared to my own experience in Iraq. Back then, the war raged so mercilessly that soldiers were injured and killed faster than they could be replaced. And when the replacements did arrive, often fresh-faced recruits, they were not received warmly by the veterans, at least not until the new soldiers earned their stripes in a handful of firefights. The point of the replacement, as we all know, was to fill the spot of the fallen warrior, to fill vacancies. The holes in the line had to be plugged or the enemy would pour through. As such, it was wise for the US military to constantly train new recruits, even as the war raged on the other side of the globe. This is true for all military conflicts in all nations, from OT times up to now. This truth is no different in most sporting events, which are a mostly harmless, entertaining form of conflict. In football, for instance, there are multiple strings of offensive and defensive players. There is the first string, which is comprised of the individuals who play the most during games. These are the team's heavy hitters. There is the second string of players, who usually watch from the bench, ready to jump into the game if a first-string player is injured and can't play, or if a player is thrown out of the game for violating the rules. Then there is the third string, who are the backups for the backups. Their chance of playing is near nothing, but they're part of the team nonetheless, ready and trained for the unfortunate day they might be needed. Finally, after these strings there is usually an entire team of players, probably referred to as the fourth string, who are the practice team. This final group plays the practice games with the upper strings, keeping the main players in top shape. Just like in the military, one football player falls and another is ready to step into the gap. God's kingdom works much like these real-world illustrations. For instance, bad conduct can get you kicked out of your promised land. This happened to Esau with his blessing, as well as Samson, Balaam the prophet, and even the children of Israel. Quitting or refusing, it goes without saying, will also get you removed, as occurred with the prophet Elijah. After all God had done to reassure, encourage, and strengthen Elijah, the prophet still refused to move forward. Elijah quit on God's plan. Here is God's response to him when, yet again, Elijah refused to continue in his mission. Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu son of Nimshi as king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place." 1 Kings 19:15-17. God found a replacement for him, a man called Elisha, who'd eventually have double the anointing of Elijah. In this world, God is establishing his kingdom and performing his work, and he uses people like you and me to accomplish this work with him. If we refuse to walk in what God created us to do, he will raise up others to step into the gap and take our place. I know, some of you might be thinking about the scripture that says that the promises of God can't be taken away, as Romans 11:29 states. In context, this verse was speaking about Israel's standing as God's people, which was an Old Testament pattern of New Testament salvation. This verse was speaking about the promise God gave to Abraham, which couldn't be forfeited. So no, salvation and being in God's family are gifts and can't be taken away. And these refer to the first purpose anyway, the relationship. But when it comes to your life on earth, what you do with it is your choice. We all have free will after all. Even after salvation, you can live life for yourself, completely disregarding your divine calling. Or you can grab hold of your purpose and live the life God has set before you. It's a choice all of us have to make. Elijah chose his fears and refused to move forward, even after doing so well and making a major impact in serving God and his purpose. But quitting is still quitting, no matter when you do it. Why wouldn't God raise up somebody else to take his place? There was still important work to be done. Years ago, when I was starting to write Evidence, the Book for Mormons, I doubted my writing abilities and many times contemplated putting off the project until later, even stopping altogether. One day, during one of these funks, the Spirit impressed on me that I should read from a book by Katie Souza, The Key to Your Expected End. But instead of reading from the front, I felt I should skip toward the middle. The chapter I felt led to read hit home right away. It was about Katie's own struggle with writing her first book and how, when she had put it off, her close friend said to Katie that if Katie wouldn't write the darn book, she would. It was too important of a message to be wasted on procrastination and doubt. And guess what? Katie buckled down and wrote it, and the book has gone on to help many incarcerated people around the world. When I finished reading this story, I knew God was warning me that if I didn't write testimony, someone else would, and the blessing I would have gotten from doing the work myself would have gone to a stranger. Guess what? I too buckled down and wrote the darn book. Now that it is finished, I'm glad I did what I was asked and put in the years of daily work. You are very important to God, as you should know by now. You are His beloved child, you are unique to Him, and in that regard, so is your relationship with God. You can't be replaced in His family. You are His for eternity. But don't for 1 second think you are so indispensable to God's work on the earth, and that God cannot, in regards to your purpose task, replace you in an instant if you refuse His call. There is a mission to be accomplished, and it will get done with or without us. Here is a New Testament parable that expresses this truth. Then he said to him, "A certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, 'Come, for all things are now ready.'" This parable is speaking primarily of God calling people into His family and the promises and blessings that come with that. The servants in the parable are the prophets and ministers of God. The people invited are the Hebrew people, to whom the promises were given. Let's continue. But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said to him, "I have bought a piece of ground and I must go and see it. I ask you to have me excused." In other words, they didn't take God's call and promises seriously. The first, with the piece of land, represents a person's property and worldly possessions. He chose these over God's promises. Here's another excuse. And another said, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am going to test them. I ask you to have me excused." In context, this could represent a person's job or livelihood. Still another said, "I have married a wife and therefore I cannot come." This man used his duty to family as the excuse for disobeying God. We all tend to do that. Let's finish the excerpt. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper." Luke 14:16-24. In other words, they forfeited their promise. The Hebrew people refused Christ and His words when He came to them, so Christ sent the word to the Gentiles and to the rest of the world. Similarly, if you or I refuse the words Christ has given us about our divine purpose, these words will eventually, if you can't be persuaded, be given to someone more faithful, who will do what he or she is asked. This new mission will be added to their original purpose task, and they will reap all the blessings the call might provide. Remember, Elisha received double what Elijah originally had, and he was Elijah's replacement. In the parable of the faithful steward, the person most faithful in what God entrusted to them, received as a reward the misused stewardship of the unfaithful. Matthew 25:1-29. And this was added to what the faithful steward already possessed. Here is what Mordecai, Esther's uncle, said to Queen Esther when she, out of fear, wouldn't take the personal risk to help her people when they were in peril. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4:13-14. Esther listened to her uncle. She had seen reason and swallowed her fear. Risking her own life and trusting God to come through for her and her people, she pleaded with her husband, the king, to save her people from annihilation. Of course she succeeded. And guess what? After succeeding, Esther and her family reaped the heavenly and earthly rewards for doing what God asked. One of the greatest examples of a person getting replaced because he was a bad steward of his purpose was King Saul, the very man whom David was anointed to replace. On more than one occasion, Saul, whom the Lord had made the first king of Israel, disobeyed the Lord's instructions, and Saul tried to lie and make excuses for his actions when he was caught. Because Saul disobeyed on such an important matter, he was rejected as king. Here's what the Lord said to the prophet Samuel immediately following. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons." 1 Samuel 16:1. If God can replace a king and even the prophet Elijah, all because of their disobedience, he certainly can replace you and me. God doesn't do this because he doesn't love you. No, even if we do quit, he'll always love us. We're still his beloved children. He replaces us because he not only loves us, but he loves the people whom we're supposed to be helping but refuse to help. He does this for them. If God has revealed to you your purpose, be a good steward of revelations from him. You are accountable for what you do with them, both in this life and the next.